The wind came first, cold, hollow, the kind that slides through barn boards and makes a man feel like the world's forgetting him on purpose. Jake Malone knew that wind. He'd ridden beside it for a decade, through cattle drives and winter trails, through taverns where men talked too loud about things they were scared to say quiet. He'd lost a war, a home, and the feeling that sleep could be trusted. What he hadn't lost were promises. Those tend to survive on their own. He stepped into the abandoned barn because of a sound that didn't belong to wind or mice. A breath caught wrong. A whisper that wasn't a word. The hayloft creaked. Jake raised his lantern, steady hand, even after all those years of whiskey and regret. "Who's there?" he said. Not loud, not gentle, just true. A face flinched in the straw. A boy, 14, maybe 15. Pale as winter, eyes fever-bright, shirt stuck to him with blood that had turned dark where it met dust. He tried to sit up and failed. Jake climbed the ladder like he was approaching a wounded colt. "I ain't gonna hurt you," Jake said, "but I need to see what's wrong." Don't take me back," the boy rasped. "Back where?" The boy swallowed. His lips trembled. Then he spoke a name that froze Jake from the inside out. McKenna. Thomas McKenna. The lantern shook once in Jake's hand. 10 years collapsed into one heartbeat. Mud, smoke, a field called Gettysburg, a dying man pressing a picture into Jake's palm and begging a promise through blood. Find her, find my child. Jake had failed that promise, or so he'd believed. "Say it again," Jake whispered. "Thomas McKenna," the boy repeated softer. "He was my father." Jake didn't sit. He didn't think. He moved. Coat off, sleeve torn, bandage pressed to the boy's side with the surety of a man who'd carried too many friends out of places designed to keep them. The wound wasn't clean. Knife. Maybe a jagged board. Fever was already licking at the edges. "What's your name?" Jake asked. The boy blinked. "Will." "Will McKenna?" A nod. Barely there, but it was there. Jake tied the bandage tight. "All right, Will McKenna. I made your pa a promise I didn't keep. I'm starting now." Outside, the wind shifted. Inside, the lantern was steady, and in between, a decision settled into Jake's bones. Come hell or more war, the boy wasn't dying here. Not alone. Not on Jake's watch. Jake carried Will out of the barn like he'd carried wounded men off battlefields. Careful, but fast enough that hesitation couldn't kill. The boy was lighter than he should have been. Too many ribs counted under a shirt too thin for the Montana night. The moon was a silver coin caught between ragged clouds, throwing long shadows over the empty dirt road into town. Will stirred once, muttering words Jake couldn't catch. Fever had him in its teeth. The settlement ahead wasn't much. 3 streets, 2 saloons, 1 church, and a doctor who liked whiskey enough to forget he was supposed to charge for his work. Jake didn't slow when a pair of drunks outside the Red Lantern called after him. He kicked the clinic door open with his boot. Doc Halvers looked up from a chipped mug. "Malone, either you've come to pay your tab or—" His eyes landed on Will. "Ah, never mind." Jake set the boy down on the examination table. "Knife wound, been festering a day, maybe 2. He's Thomas McKenna's son." The doc's hands froze halfway to the bottle of carbolic. "McKenna, as in the Union man who—" "As in the man who died at Gettysburg," Jake cut in. His tone left no room for debate. Doc worked in silence after that, metal clinking, Will groaning when the wound was cleaned. Jake stayed at the boy's side, gripping the edge of the table hard enough his knuckles went white. Every flicker of pain on Will's face lit up 10-year-old memories. Mud, cannon smoke, and a promise whispered over a dying man's rattling breath. The clinic's door swung open again, but it wasn't the wind this time. Sheriff Avery stepped inside, hand resting a casual-like on the butt of his Colt. His eyes narrowed at the sight of Will. "Well, well," the sheriff drawled. "Looks like you found our little runaway." Jake didn't move. Runaway from what? Avery's smile didn't reach his eyes. From trouble, the kind that's been spilling blood in my town for 3 nights now. Jake glanced at Will, then back at the sheriff. "He's wounded. He's staying here." "That's so?" Avery took a step closer, spurs whispering against the floorboards. "You might want to think twice about getting involved, Malone. Folks who help this boy tend to find bad luck comes calling." Jake rose to his full height, shadow stretching long across the lamplight. "Sheriff, bad luck's been riding my trail for years. One more rider won't scare me." The tension between them was thick enough to taste. Somewhere outside, the wind rattled the clinic sign. Inside, a boy fought fever, a doctor worked fast, and Jake Malone silently vowed that whatever storm Will McKenna had brought to town, it would have to go through him first. Jake didn't like leaving Will in the clinic, but Doc swore he'd sit with the boy till dawn. Fever needed fighting with cool cloths and quiet, and right now the town's quiet had teeth in it. If trouble was hunting the boy, Jake needed to find out whose trigger finger it belonged to. He headed for the Red Lantern Saloon, where news traveled fast and liquor loosened the wrong tongues. Inside, the lamplight was honey thick, shadows clinging to the corners like men who didn't want their faces remembered. A piano played something ragged in the back, but the notes didn't hide the stink of fresh gunpowder. Jake took a spot at the bar. Sam, the barkeep, poured without asking. "Heard you blew in with the wind, Malone, and that you carried a bleeding boy into Halva's place." Jake sipped slow. "Word sure travels easy here." Sam leaned closer. "That boy's been hunted all week. Couple of riders came through asking about him. One wore a deputy's star, the other wore a grin too wide for a man with blood on his boots." Jake didn't look toward the far table, but his gut told him the 2 men sitting there weren't playing cards for fun. One was young, twitchy, eyes darting like a jackrabbit in tall grass. The other was heavy-set, calm as winter ice, chewing on a toothpick like it was the only thing keeping him from killing time, and maybe people. "You don't want a part in this, Malone," Sam said. "They say the boy's got something that ain't his. Something worth killing over." Jake set the glass down. "Maybe. Or maybe he's just got a name someone's scared of." At that, the heavier man's eyes slid toward Jake. No smile, just a long, measuring look. Jake pushed off the bar, heading for the back door. The alley smelled of rain that hadn't fallen yet. He didn't make 3 steps before boots scraped behind him. "You Jake Malone?" a voice asked. Low, smooth. Jake turned slow. The heavy-set man from the table stood there, toothpick gone, hand resting on his belt. "Boy's not yours to save," the man said. "Turn him over, and you can ride out of here breathing." Jake's own hand eased toward the worn leather of his holster. "Tell me why you want him, and I might think about it." The man's smile was cold enough to make the wind seem warm. "Ask the ghost of Thomas McKenna. Oh, wait, you can't." Before Jake could reply, the man tipped his hat and walked away, leaving a promise hanging in the alley air like the weight of a noose. Jake hit the clinic door at a run. The smell of carbolic was there, but no Doc Halvers, no Will. The bed was a mess of tangled blankets, still warm. A kerosene lamp guttered low on the desk, throwing light over a single scuffed boot print, too big to be Will's, leading toward the back door. The alley was empty, except for the stink of fresh horse sweat and a scrap of rope lying loose in the mud. Whoever took the boy had been quick, and they'd gone south, toward the low hills where moonlight died in shadow. Jake swung into the saddle, his mare sensing the urgency, hooves pounding down the narrow street. He caught the faint glimmer of two riders ahead, one slumped between the other's arms like dead weight. By the time he reached the hills, the track split. One horse had gone on fast, the other had doubled back. The echo of a rifle bolt sliding home warned Jake an instant before the shot tore past his ear, splintering rock. He slid from the saddle, drew his Colt, and rolled into the scrub. Silence. Then a voice, smooth, familiar. "You should have listened, Malone." The heavy-set man from the saloon stepped out of the shadows, rifle leveled. The moon caught the edge of his grin. "Boy's carrying something of mine," he said. "You give him back, and maybe I'll let you ride out with your hide intact." Jake's mind worked fast. Will's fear, the sheriff's warning, Sam's whispered, something worth killing over. If Will had anything that could draw this kind of heat, it wasn't just money. It was leverage, something that tied straight back to Thomas McKenna, and maybe to why that name still made men's voices drop. "You've got one problem," Jake said, stepping just enough to draw the man's aim. "What's that?" Jake's shot answered for him, clean, fast, sending the rifle spinning into the dirt. By the time the man cursed and dove for it, Jake was already in the saddle, pushing hard for the second set of tracks. The wind knifed his face, and somewhere ahead, Will McKenna was either waiting or running out of time. The trail wound south into country that even the wind hesitated to cross. Out here, the land broke into jagged teeth, mesas and cliffs stabbing up at a sky so black it seemed to lean down on you. Jake followed the tracks at a dead run, his mare's breath puffing in the cold like steam off a boiling kettle. Somewhere ahead, Will McKenna was in the hands of men who weren't in the business of keeping hostages alive for long. Hours from the nearest lamp-lit street, Jake reined up at the mouth of a canyon. Sheer rock walls rose on either side, funneling the moonlight into a pale river that ran along the ground. Hoof prints, 2 sets, led in. He dismounted, crouched low, brushing his fingers over the dirt. Still fresh. They'd only beaten him here by minutes. The canyon was a place you didn't enter unless you meant to kill or die. The Lakota called it the place where echoes don't come back. Sound died here, swallowed by the stone. Jake loosened his Colt in its holster, every step forward a conversation between boots and gravel. Up ahead, voices. 2 men. One was the twitchy rider from the saloon, the other the one holding Will upright in the saddle earlier. Jake moved slow, hugging the canyon wall, letting the moon shadow him. The words carried only in pieces. "Letter, worth 1,000 in gold, can't let it reach." And then, unmistakable, Thomas McKenna's name. Jake's stomach turned cold. This was bigger than a boy who'd seen something he shouldn't. If they were talking about a letter, then maybe Will had been carrying proof of something, a confession, an accusation, written by his father before Gettysburg swallowed him. A rock shifted under Jake's boot. The twitchy one spun, pistol half out, but Jake had his Colt up first. "Easy," Jake said, stepping into the light, "unless you're looking to repaint this canyon wall with bad decisions." Will was slumped against the bigger man's chest, lips moving in a fevered mumble. Jake's eyes found the boy's hand, clenched tight around something small, leather-bound, and stained darker on one corner. The letter. The bigger man sneered. "You think you're some kind of hero, Malone? You have no idea what's written in that paper. It'll burn more than just the people you think it will." Jake's voice was low, even. "Then you should have left it in the grave where you found it." The twitchy one moved first, an obvious draw, shaky and desperate. Jake's shot cracked like a whip, the man's pistol skittering across the dirt. The bigger man tightened his grip on Will, dragging the boy back toward the deeper dark of the canyon. Jake advanced, each step measured. The air here felt thick, like the canyon itself was waiting to see which man it would keep. And then Will's hand jerked up, the leather packet flung hard toward Jake. It hit his chest, and Jake caught it without breaking aim. Now he had it, and the other man knew it. The canyon went still, no wind, no sound, just 3 heartbeats pounding in different chests. "End of the trail," Jake said. "Let the boy go, or I read this letter out loud before I plant you here for the crows." The canyon felt tighter than it had a moment ago, like the rock walls had leaned in to listen. Even the stars above were caught in the stillness, their light cold and sharp on stone. Jake's breath clouded in the air, Colt steady in his hand, the weight of Thomas McKenna's letter pressing against his chest through the worn fabric of his coat. The bigger man, the one with shoulders like a corral gate, kept Will in a headlock, dragging him one step back for every step Jake took forward. Will's boots scraped in the gravel, barely finding purchase. His head lolled a little, fever and exhaustion pulling him toward darkness, but his eyes were locked on Jake, silent, pleading, a tether. "Let the boy go," Jake said, his voice so calm it made the other man's grin tighten at the edges. "Or we read this here and now." The man's tone was flat, controlled in a way that spoke of someone who'd made his living with threats. "You think I'm scared of words on a page?" Jake's eyes narrowed. "Number, I think you're scared of the wrong people reading them." A pause, brief, but enough. Jake saw it, that flicker in the other man's jaw, that fraction of a second where his grip on Will shifted. Confirmation. This letter wasn't about gold or land. This was about the kind of truth that could sink a man faster than a bullet between the eyes. Will coughed weakly, and Jake's fingers itched to tear him free. But the canyon was a killing ground. One wrong move, and they'd both die before they ever knew the contents of that leather packet. The man's voice came again, quieter now. "That letter, your dear friend McKenna, he wasn't the saint you think. War makes devils of some men, and your boy's daddy was worse than most." Jake's knuckles whitened on the Colt, because that was a place he didn't want to go. He'd seen men break in the war, seen kindness bleed out of their eyes until only survival was left. But Thomas had been the one who kept Jake from crossing that line, or so he'd believed. "What's in here?" Jake said, patting the letter against his chest. "Doesn't belong to you, doesn't belong to me either, but it sure as hell belongs to his son." The bigger man laughed, low, bitter. "And what will his son think when he learns his father condemned an entire unit to die so he could save his own skin?" The words hung heavy in the canyon air. Jake didn't show the jolt they gave him, but inside something twisted. Could it be true? Could Thomas McKenna, the man he'd sworn to honor, have worn betrayal like a hidden badge? Will made a small sound, barely more than a breath. He didn't, the boy whispered, but there was doubt in his voice now, the kind of doubt that planted roots deep. Jake stepped forward, boots crunching on the grit. You can tell your story all you want, or I can tell mine. Either way, you're leaving here without him. The man's hand twitched. Jake saw it. The subtle shift of weight, the coiling for violence. He moved first. The colt barked once, the report trapped in the canyon deafening. The bigger man staggered, the grip on Will breaking. The boy tumbled forward into the dirt, and Jake was already there, yanking him to his feet and shoving him behind him. The wounded man straightened, one hand pressed to his side, blood glistening dark under the moon. His eyes were full of something Jake recognized, not fear, but the understanding that the game had changed. You read that letter, the man hissed, and you'll wish you'd put a bullet in your own head. Jake holstered the Colt slowly, without breaking eye contact. I've been wishing for worse things than that for years. He took Will's arm, guiding him toward the canyon mouth. Each step felt heavier now, not from the boy's weight, but from the truth in Jake's pocket. Because no matter what was written in Thomas McKenna's hand, it was going to change the shape of this night, and maybe the rest of Jake's life. Somewhere behind them, the bigger man's curses chased them into the wind, but in front of them, the trail was open, and the first wash of dawn was touching the ridges far to the east. The boy's life was still in Jake's hands, and so was a letter that might burn them both. Dawn came slow and pale, as if the land itself were waking from a fever. Jake rode hard until his mare's legs shook, until the town's crooked roofs appeared like tired teeth against the horizon. He didn't waste breath. Doc Halvers met them at the clinic with a face carved in relief by too many nights. Will was feverish but alive. Jake sat on a stool and unwrapped the letter again, smoothing the edges with fingers that had held rifles more often than papers. The words inside weren't neat absolution or a tidy confession. They were names, dates, receipts, little notations that fitted together like a puzzle, deals struck in back rooms, deeds that didn't belong to those who held them, a ledger that traced a crooked trade in land and lives. The point wasn't to venerate Thomas McKenna. If the letter showed anything, it showed a man who'd been cornered into terrible choices. But it did show a trail that led to men who had been acting as judges, jurors, and executioner in one town. Jake took the packet to the church, where the reverend still had the kind of authority that wasn't bought with bullets. They read the letter aloud to a handful of people who hadn't yet been broken by fear. Doc Halvers, Sam the barkeep, a couple of farmers whose hands still knew honest work, and one or two who had lost too much to remain blind. The reverend's voice was steady. He folded the paper and said, "We'll do this right." Not loudly, not with bravado, with the quiet force of people who knew what it meant to stand up after being pushed down. They confronted the men named in the letter the way truth is best confronted in a small town, with witnesses, with clear claims, and with the knowledge that news travels. There was a night of shouting that unfolded in a parlor where the accused had long sat like a god. There were offers to buy silence and threats to burn the town to keep the ledger hidden. In the end, it was proof and numbers and a pair of steady voices that changed things. Some of those men left in the dark with their pride and their money. Others were bound and turned over to the federal authorities who would finally look at old business with a new, cleaner light. All of that happened slow and ugly and human. There were no quick pardons or cinematic showdowns. There were hearings. There were grudging handshakes where they were needed. There were late-night arguments in the saloon between people who had been friends for years. And there were consequences. Some men lost more than their reputations. Some families were stitched back together. Some losses could not be repaired at all. Will's recovery was quieter. Fever gave way to a stubborn appetite. The pale boy's hands grew stronger. Jake taught him how to gut a fish without flinching, how to mend a fence, how to sit a horse so your back didn't remember the wrong things. But more than lessons of survival, Jake taught Will how to ask questions about the dead, about choices, about the kind of man a boy might want to become. And Will listened. He asked about Thomas in the way children piece ghosts into real life, sometimes tender, sometimes angry, sometimes just curious. When the town finally gathered for a small no-frills burial, not a parade, just a worn grave and a handful of people who owed him, Jake stood with Will at his side. The Reverend said a few words about duty and mercy. Will placed a carved wooden toy into the dirt, a small thing Jake had whittled for him while a fever smoldered. It felt like closure, only because they made it feel like one, by burying not just a man, but a weight they'd carried for years. Months passed, and the worst of the shadow that had hung over town lifted. The ledger's names could not be erased, but their power did. Will grew taller, his laugh found new notes. He and Jake built a life that was practical and stubborn. A small house with a threadbare rug and a stove that took up half the room, a garden that grew more weeds than vegetables at first, and then, slowly, green things worth eating. Jake did not try to explain what redemption looked like. He simply did what a man promises to do. He kept his word. The frontier did what it always did. It tested them. It blessed them. It made sharp what was soft. Jake learned that promises don't erase the past, but they do shape the future. Will learned that a father's name could be complicated and that truth didn't always make things easier, but it did make them real. Between them, they found family not because blood insisted it be so, but because they both chose it, day after day. On a clear evening, when the sky burned low and orange, Jake sat on the porch and listened to Will's voice as the boy told a story about a horse he wanted to own someday. Jake smiled, and the wind that came by the barn seemed kinder now, as if it had remembered how to carry good things, too. If you enjoyed this tale of duty, second chances, and finding family where you least expect it, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel for more Wild West stories. Ring the bell so you don't miss the next one, and drop a comment below. Which moment moved you the most? Was it the discovery in the barn, the reading of Thomas's letter, or Jake's rescue in the canyon? Tell us your favorite scene and why. We read every comment. Share the video with someone who loves frontier tales, and thanks for watching. Until the next story.